Hello and welcome to Banking Frontiers Live. In this enlightening series of conversations with industry luminaries, we have chosen a very interesting guest today. His name is Surajit Dev, who is the head of technology management group at IDFC First Bank. He is going to share some very deep insights about the bank of the future with us. Surajit, welcome to Banking Frontiers Live.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me today in this, discussion. Very, very happy to be with you today, Babu.
Wonderful. So, Surajit, one thing that is very exciting for us is to understand how the bank of the future is going to look like from a banker who has been sitting inside and a banker who has also worked as a technologist outside and supplied to it.
Babu, I think it's a very, very, very interesting question. When I think about bank of the future, right, I really think about me as a customer first, because I think all of us are customers of banks. And you really think about what you expect from your bank, right? If you think about me as a bank, I expect my bank to be as reliable like an Amazon, providing experience like what a Netflix and a Spotify provides, be as trustworthy as possible. That's what I expect my bank to be. Now, if you think banks and the way the banks have been over the last many years, I think they have been there in the market, but banks typically have always been, trying to build the kind of experience that we have all wanted to build, or wanted to have. So essentially, for me, I've always, tried to see that, we should have something that, delivers the kind of experience that a Netflix or a Spotify or an Amazon provides. Now, how do you actually get to such kind of things in future? I think that's pretty much every bank in the world has been trying to do that. Now, the last 20 years of growth in banking, if you see, banks have started off with very traditional core banking platforms, initial computerization happening, the cores being rolled out to various branches across, and then came the age of internet banking, where a lot of investments have happened on internet and mobile. And we've talked a lot about digital transformation, right? But then did it actually deliver the kind of experience we all wanted? Maybe the answer is no. This front to back digitization, as we're calling, is where, I think the banks need to invest a lot more. My expectation of the future is that banks are going to be becoming more like a platform company, where they are going to become embedded within our lives, within the experiences that we have at various other places. So embedded banking for me is very, very important, if you ask me as a customer. Now, on the back end, sitting inside the banks, I believe banks are going to become more and more platform companies. On one hand, they will start engaging with their customers, which means banks will have to build digital platforms which converges all the channels. If you walk into a branch versus if you call a contact center, or if you, let's say, open your mobile app, the experience has to be very seamless. And these kind of things can happen only if you build platforms which converges multiple channels together. That's, of course, one part of very important banking. The second part of what future banks are going to look like are about good products, because end of the day, it is the product which sells. And if you think about banks, typically, there's hardly any differentiation between the banks. If you walk any bank in this country or banks across the world, generally you will have an asset product, you will have a liabilities product, you will have a wealth management product, but there's hardly any differentiation between those products. The good banks of the future will be able to create differentiation in terms of doing good products. Essentially, if you ask me, quote unquote, I feel banks of the future is going to be platform of platforms. There are going to be multiple platforms, every one of the platform addressing one concern, something addressing concern of a customer, something addressing concern of an employee, something addressing concern of the embedded ecosystem that the banks are going to deal with. And maybe the last bit of very important piece is addressing the concerns about data. So these are like the big things which are potentially going to be platforms of the future. Collating all of these things together would come another platform, which is what we call the bank. That's my view about what banks of the future are.
That's fantastic. So how do you as an organization future-proof your infrastructure platforms to ensure that you can make enough agile technologies and emerging technologies, connect with it?
So it's a very hard problem to deal with. If you see the pace at which technology is changing, it's actually very difficult for any organization, forget about banks, to keep pace with this one. In the last 5 to 6 years, the pace at which things are changing is, you could potentially find something new today, becoming completely obsolete in the next 3 to 4 years. As banks, if you're really focusing on technology, you have to be able to make sure how do you build platforms which can possibly transcend this kind of change or shifts which are happening in technology. So there are certain types of technologies which potentially you have to select in a way which possibly lasts about 6 to 8 to 10 years, right? That's of course something, but it's very hard to predict what is going to be. The foundational, thing in computer, end of the day, it is all about, you have a server, you have a programming language, and then there's some code which is written on top of that. There are storages which are all attached. So these foundational things possibly would not change so far. Of course, the pace at which computation is happening, the pace at which, the technologies around storages, the pace at which the programming languages are changing are very fast. But some of these things are, of course, going to be constant. What is important for banks as we decide to understand is what are some of the pieces that I might want to swap in and swap out as changes happen. Not everything needs to change. So how do you unbundle things which are there in banking? I mean, in the past, we have built systems which are very large, very monolithic in nature. You have all or nothing. I mean, if there is something today, if you have to change, you have to change everything. And this is an issue when you actually deal with tech. So when we build for the future, I think my suggestion is to build things in small, what we call Lego blocks, as we call it. So the Lego blocks together can be composed together to build what the bank really wants. To be able to visualize that bank in the right way. Let's say there is this big bank which has multiple things running, and every one of these things is a Lego. So ability to unbundle the bigger bank into smaller pieces, I think, is very critical as we think about technology. And as we unbundle this, some of this, of course, can continue to be old because you really can't invest in everything. I mean, there have been banks who have been in business for many, many years, for decades. Can you change everything? The answer is no. Do you want to change pieces of that? The answer is yes. And this change of the pieces which are relevant in the context of the business of today can only happen when you unbundle. Now, I know there are many, many banks which are investing in technology today. I think it's almost become a fad that I have to invest in technology. I have to invest in digital to stay relevant for the future. But that investment that we are making today has to keep in mind that you have dealt with legacy for so long. You're trying to change the legacy today. Would you again need to change? Because what is latest and greatest today will become legacy 5 years from now. And next time when you're trying to make the change, would you really want to have the kind of investment we're making it today? So we have to be able to think in terms of unbundling, making sure that you have the right sized components which can be changed on a piecemeal manner if technology changes in future. And technology is definitely going to change. We all know.
Wonderful, wonderful explanation to what it is. I used to hear about solutions-oriented architecture way back in late 90s when solutions used to come. And today we are no different. We are thinking the same thing, how you can put it into Lego blocks and try to unbundle it and rebundle it. When you're a bank or an entity regulated like this, what are those critical things one should keep in mind to map the right kind of cloud strategy for your organization?
Cloud is a reality. There's no way we can ignore cloud. And I think you have rightly pointed that out. But it is also important to understand what is the best possible use case for a cloud. I mean, we have traditionally built softwares. We have run software in the data centers. It, of course, had its own challenges, but it did work. And then as we go into the future, of course, people are trying to think, is cloud going to be my answer for every problem? My take is, it is an answer to many problems, but it isn't an answer to every problem that we have. My take is there could be other situations. For example, if you know that there is a very standard workload, my utilization of the computing resources is not going to change over time. It might make sense for these kind of workloads to be run in a data center of your own. And this potentially could be purely from a cost standpoint, because end of the day, you're actually moving. I mean, if you think about banks like us or rather any other bank in the country, usually capital is not a problem. You could always go out and buy infrastructure. There is, of course, difficulty in finding skill set, but if that is also not a hard thing to do, you should be able to hire skills as well. You should be able to put in data centers. So the question is mapping, technologies to the cloud depends upon what kind of use case, what kind of workload it is. And I think it's a conscious, judicious call that, every organization needs to take. Secondly, if you think about cloud services today, of course, buying infrastructure on the cloud and buying infrastructure in my data center doesn't give me much of a value add. If I really have to go to the cloud, I potentially would go and use the services provided by the cloud, taking me away from what we call infrastructure as a service to the platform as a service domain. Now, as banks, I do deal with customers' data. I do deal with customers' money. I do deal with, a regulatory framework in the country. Multiple other factors in terms of regulatory, guidelines, in terms of internal policies, risks, geopolitical issue that also has to be considered before we make a decision on the cloud. But all said and done, I know the future is going to be cloud.
Wonderful. Now, just coming to security and every infrastructure that you build is basically scalability and agility. But when it comes to architectural changes to enhance security and privacy, has there anything of this side coming into the picture architecturally? And especially when you are engaging with a lot of fintechs, there are a lot of risks you are prone to it. So how do you build that grounds up architecture for security and agility?
See, if you especially see, countries like India, I mean, what I see is, and it's been traditionally like that. Security is always an afterthought. This is how the software industry has gone. So you essentially build something, you deploy something, and then something goes wrong, you go and fix it. This is how the cycle has been so far. I think off late, the kind of what I call regulatory scrutiny which has come on banks in terms of security, I think that is forcing banks to kind of rethink their traditional posture and be a bit more proactive. Now, I don't think there's any rocket science in telling there has to be a left shift in security. You really can't go all the way and then, as an afterthought, start thinking about security. This left shift in security means it has to start all the way from the point when you start thinking about applications. You have to think security at that point. You have to start thinking about, security all the way when the code is getting written. You have to test, the use cases, the non-functional security related use cases when the applications are going live in production, so that by the time you get into production, a lot of those, what we call nagging issues get nailed. And some of the foundational aspects which are expected in an application, is addressed. Now, that's of course where the industry needs to go, especially banks. If you see fintechs also, I mean, there's no difference in fintechs, right? RBI, for example, has been very, very, I would say, I think it's been very good that they have put a very clear set of KPIs on banks, the way they have to, look into and measure on an ongoing basis their security and cybersecurity posture, as we say. So if you really work back from that, there is 100 plus, KRAs, as they call it, which needs to be reported by regulated entities to the regulator on a very periodic basis. It is possible for you to actually take those KRAs and create a set of guidelines. Now, those 100 plus things could potentially mean about a bunch of application level guidelines. Some of these, of course, not all KRIs are related to applications. There are stuff which needs to be done from an operational standpoint, potentially things like trainings and others. I'm leaving that aside for the time being for the sake of this discussion. But everything else, there is a possibility to carve out a set of guidelines which can be used in that left shift strategy. Basically, you take those, convert those and push it back all the way to the left so that those kind of things can get addressed all the way from day one. But then we are also dealing with a lot of legacy. End of the day, most of the banks have been in business for decades, and there are platforms, data centers, and applications which are running. Many times it is really, really very hard to change. The kind of, thing, for example, if you have a legacy application which is running in a certain way, and there is, of course, as a part of some of the new security related issues that we're facing, you're expected to encrypt certain data fields or encrypt certain parts of, the data. It is really, very hard to do on legacy platforms. I think banks will have to invest on those. They will have to work with their vendor partners to make sure that all those, what we call legacy issues that is there, because what worked yesterday may not work today and definitely is not going to work tomorrow. So some of this we will have to go back, and it's a bit of a grunt work that people have to do. There is no choice. But whatever we build new, and I think there's a lot of investment which is happening across the banking industry, whatever we build new, we should make sure that the left shift happens. So it's a mix. In some case, you're going to go back and fix stuff which has already happened. The new stuff, of course, will have to be built in the new way. And cybersecurity has to be at the forefront of everything.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it right. And at the end of the day, this is a cloud that is hovering around you throughout the lifetime of the bank. So you cannot escape. You have to be ready for it. Thank you so much, Surajit, for such a wonderful conversation. And we look forward to seeing you more in Banking Frontiers Live and Banking Frontiers conferences.
Thank you, and pleasure to be here today once again, Rahul.